heel as he was. Now he knew the truth. George Bear shook his head. Schaefer had killed all of those people. This was no longer a game. Bear trudged upstairs to the hideaway apartment. His arms and legs felt heavy, and he had a slight pain in his chest. His vision was tunneled. He pulled down the dusty blinds and began to look around. Schaefer had boastfully described the garage and taxi several times during the game. He had flaunted the existence of the hideaway and sworn to the other players that it was real and not just some fantasy in a role-playing game. Geoffrey had openly dared them to see it for themselves, and that was why Bear was in Washington. At 10 o'clock that night, Bear took Schaefer's taxi out. The keys were there, almost as a dare. Was it? He figured he had a night to experience exactly what Schaefer had experienced. According to Geoffrey, half the fun of the game was foreplay, checking out the possibilities, seeing the whole game board before you made a move. From 10 o'clock until 11:30, Bear explored the streets of D.C., but he didn't pick up a fare. He kept his off-duty sign on. What a game, Bear kept thinking as he drove. Is this how Geoffrey does it? Is this how he feels when he's prowling the city? He continued to drive until past 2 in the morning. He drank in the sights, played the dizzying game, and then he had to stop again. 2 young girls were hailing for a taxi on the corner. The area was called Shore, and Howard University was very close, according to several signs. The girls were slender, delectable in stacked heels and shiny clothes that glowed in the dark. One of them wore a microskirt, and he could see the tops of black or navy thigh-highs as he stopped to pick them up. They must be hookers. Schaefer's favorite prey, Bear thought to himself. The second prostitute was even prettier and sexier than the first. She wore white stacked bath sandals, side-striped white athletic pants, a teeny tank top in blue camouflage. "Where are we going?" Bear asked as they scampered over to the taxi. The girl in the microskirt did the talking. "We're going to Princeton Place, that's Petworth, darling, and then you're going away," she said. She tossed her head back and issued a taunting laugh. Bear snickered to himself. He was beginning to get into this now. The girls climbed in, and Bear couldn't resist checking them out in the mirror. The foxy one in the microskirt caught him looking. He felt like a schoolboy, found it intoxicating, didn't divert his eyes from hers. She casually flipped him the finger. He didn't stop looking. Couldn't. So this was how it felt to Schaefer. This was the game of games. He couldn't take his eyes off the girls. His heart was pounding. Microskirt wore a tightly fitted ribbed tank top. Her long fingernails were airbrushed in kiwi and mango colors. The other girl smiled shyly in his direction. She seemed more innocent. Was she? A necklace that read "Baby Girl" dangled between her young breasts. If they were going to Petworth, they had to be hooking. "I have a proposition for you," he said to Microskirt.
"All right, darling," she said. "Be 100 for the half, plus our ride to Petworth. That's my proposition for you."
Schaefer liked to know when any of the other players traveled, especially if they came to Washington. He had gone to a lot of trouble to hack his way into their computers to keep track of them. Famine had recently bought plane tickets, and now he was here in D.C. Why? It wasn't hard to follow George Bear once he got to town. Schaefer was still reasonably good at it. He'd had plenty of practice in tracking and surveillance during his years in the service. He was disappointed that Famine had decided to intersect with his fantasy. Intersection happened occasionally in the game, but it was rare. Both players were supposed to agree beforehand. Famine was clearly breaking the rules. What did he know? Or think he knew? Then Bear genuinely surprised him. Not only did he visit Schaefer's hideaway, but he actually took the taxi for a ride. What the hell was he doing? At a little past 2 in the morning, Schaefer watched the gypsy cab pick up 2 young girls in Shore. Was Bear copycatting? Was he setting some kind of trap for Schaefer? Or was it something else altogether? Bear took the girls to S Street, which wasn't far from the pickup point. He followed the girls up the darkened stairs of an aging brownstone, and then they all disappeared inside. He had a blue anorak thrown over his right arm, and Schaefer suspected that a pistol was under the coat. Christ, he'd taken 2 of them. He could have been seen by anyone on the street. The cab could have been spotted. Schaefer parked on the street. He waited and watched. He didn't like being in this part of shore, especially without his disguise and driving the Jaguar. There were some old crumbling brownstones and a couple of boarded-up, graffiti-covered shacks on the street. No one was outside. He saw a light blink on the top floor and figured that was where Bear had taken the two girls. Probably their flat. He watched the brownstone from 2 until close to 4. He couldn't take his eyes away. While he waited, he imagined dozens of scenarios that might have brought famine here. He wondered if the others were in Washington too. Or was famine acting alone? Was he playing the 4 horsemen right now? Schaefer waited and waited for Bear to come out of the brownstone, but he didn't come down, and Schaefer grew more impatient and worried and angry. He fidgeted. His breathing became labored. He had lurid, paranoid fantasies about what Bear might have done up there. Had he killed the 2 girls? Taken their identification? Was this a trap? He thought so. What else could it be? Still no George Bear. Schaefer couldn't stand it any longer. He climbed out of the Jaguar. He stood on the street and stared up at the windows of the flat. He wondered if he, too, was being watched. He sensed a trap. Wondered if he should flee. Christ, where the hell is Bear? What game is famine playing? Was there a back way out of the building? If so, why had he left the taxi as evidence? Evidence! Damn him! But then he saw Bear finally leave the building. He quickly crossed S Street, got into the cab, and drove away. Schaefer decided to go upstairs. He jogged over to the building and found the wooden front door unlocked. He hurried up the steep, winding stairs. He had a flashlight in one hand and turned it on. His semi-automatic was in the other. Schaefer made his way to the 4th floor. He immediately knew which of the 2 flats was the one. A poster for Mary J. Blige's What's the 411 album was on the splintered and scarred door to his right. The girls lived here. He turned the handle and carefully pushed the door open. He pointed his gun inside. Ready. One of the girls came out of the bathroom wearing a fluffy black towel on her head. Nothing else. She was a hot number with pert little titties. Christ, famine must have paid for it. What a fool. What a wanker. "Who the hell are you? What are you doing in here?" the girl shouted angrily. "I'm Death," he grinned, and then announced, "I'm here for you, and your pretty friend."
I had gotten home from the John Doe murder scene a little past 3:30 in the morning. I went to bed, but I set my alarm for 6:30. I managed to get myself up before the kids went off to school. There's something important I need to tell you before you head out to school. Watch our manners, pay attention in class, even if the teacher's boring. Leave with our left if it ever comes to a fight in the schoolyard, Johnny offered with a wink. I rolled my eyes. What I was going to say is that you should be especially nice to Mrs. Johnson today. You see, last night, Christine said she'd marry me. I guess that means she's marrying all of us. At that point, everything became hugging and loud celebrating in the kitchen. The kids got chocolate milk and bacon grease all over me. I'd never seen Nana happier, and I felt exactly the same. I eventually made it to work that morning. I had made some progress on the John Doe homicide, and early on Tuesday morning, I learned that the man whose body had been dumped on Alabama Avenue was a 34-year-old research analyst named Franklin Odenkirk. Once I had the name of the victim, information came quickly. Odenkirk was married and had 3 small children. He had taken a late flight back from New York, where he'd given a talk at the Rockefeller Institute. The plane landed on time, and he deboarded at National around 10. What happened after that was a mystery. For the remainder of the week, I was busy with the murder case. The killing roughly paralleled the Jane Does so far, but of course the chief of detectives didn't want to hear that. There was no Jane Doe killer, according to him. Why? Because he didn't want to shift dozens of detectives to Southeast and begin an extensive investigation on the basis of my instincts and gut feelings. I had heard Pittman joke that Southeast wasn't a part of his city. In the meantime, The killer struck again. The most recent homicide scene was an old crumbling brownstone in a bad section of S Street in Shaw. A lot of college kids and also some young professionals live in the up-and-down, mostly middle-class neighborhood. Lately, prostitution has become a problem there. According to Sampson, the two dead girls were both prostitutes who occasionally worked in the neighborhood, but mostly turned tricks over in Petworth. A single squad car and an EMS truck were parked at the homicide scene. A uniformed patrolman was posted on the front stoop, and he seemed intent on keeping intruders out. He was young, baby-faced, with smooth butterscotch skin. I didn't know him, so I flashed my detective shield. "Detective Cross," he grunted. I sensed that he had heard of me. "What do we have so far?" I asked before I went inside to trudge up 4 steep flights. "What do you hear, officer?" "2 girls dead upstairs, both pros apparently. One of them lived in the building. Murders were called in anonymously. Maybe a neighbor, maybe the pimp. They're 16, 17, maybe younger. Too bad. They didn't deserve this." I nodded, took a deep breath, then quickly climbed up the steep, winding, creaking stairs to the 4th floor. Prostitutes make for difficult police investigations, and I wondered if the Weasel knew that. On average, a hooker out of Petworth might turn a dozen tricks or more a night, and that's a lot of forensic evidence just on her body. The door to apartment 4A was wide open, and I could see inside. It was an efficiency, with 1 large room, kitchenette, bath. A fluffy white area rug lay between the 2 daybeds. A lava lamp was undulating green blobs next to several dildos. Sampson crouched on the far side of the daybed. He looked like an NBA power forward searching the floor for a missing contact lens. I walked into a small, untidy room that smelled of incense, peach blossom fragrance, greasy food. A bright red and yellow McDonald's container of fries was open on the couch. Dirty clothes covered the chairs, bike shorts, short shorts, Carl County urban clothes. At least a dozen bottles of nail polish and remover, a couple of nail files, and cotton balls lay on the floor. There was a heavy, cloying smell of fruity perfume in the room. I went around the bed to look at the victims. 2 very young women, both naked from the waist down. The Weasel had been here. I could feel it. The girls were lying one on top of the other, looking like lovers. They looked as if they were having sex on the floor. One girl wore a blue tank top, the other black lingerie. They both still wore slides, stacked bath sandals that are popular nowadays. Most of the Jane Does had been left naked, but unlike many of the others, these 2 would be fairly easy for us to identify. "No actual ID on either girl," Sampson said, without looking up from his work. "One of them rents the apartment, though," I told him. He nodded. "Probably pays cash. She's in the cash business." Sampson was wearing latex rubber gloves and was bent down close to the 2 women. "The killer wore gloves," Sampson said, still without looking up at me. "Don't seem to be fingerprints anywhere. That's what the techie said first look through. They both were shot, Alex. Single shot in the forehead." I was still looking around the room, collecting information, letting the details of the murder scene flow over me. I noticed an array of hair products, soft sheen, carefree curls, styling gel, several wigs. There was also a pager. The girls were young and pretty. They had skinny little legs, small, bony feet, silver toe rings that looked like they came from the same shop. Their discarded clothes amounted to insignificant little bundles on the bloodied hardwood floor. In one corner of the small room, there were vestiges of brief childhoods, a lotto game, a stuffed blue bear that was threadbare and looked about as old as the girls themselves, a Barbie doll, a Ouija board. "Take a good look, Alex. It gets weirder and weirder. Our Weasel is starting to freak out." I sighed and bent down to see what Sampson had discovered. The smaller and perhaps younger of the 2 girls was lying on top. The girl underneath was on her back. Her glazed brown eyes stared straight up at a broken light fixture in the ceiling, as if she had seen something terrible up there. The girl on top had been positioned with her face, actually her mouth, tilted down into the other girl's crotch. "Killer played real cute games with them after they were dead," Sampson said. "Move the one on top a little. Lift her head, Alex. You see it?" I saw it. A completely new M.O. for the Jane Does, at least the ones I knew about. The phrase, "stuck on each other," ran through my mind. I wondered if that was the killer's message. The girl on top was connected to the one underneath by her tongue. Sam